Go. It's always an important thing. And as we go right ahead, add yourself to the map and also let us know who's here, where you're coming from, and how you're thinking about the principles and purpose of the Constitution in your classroom. Okay, so take a moment, introduce yourself there. And finally, I'm recognizing some of your familiar names over there. Go ahead and if you're coming back again, tell us how you've already started incorporating EAD into your classroom and into your thinking. Okay, so take that time, go ahead and let us know. We'll give you all a moment to do that. And as you are doing that, adding yourself to the map, introducing yourself, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of reminders for the workshop for today. Our Google site, make sure you have that link. Michael's going to keep dropping into the chat. That's going to be where we interact, ask questions, stop and reflect. Okay. And if you need documentation for today's webinar, if you need, after today's session, what we do is we send out a letter just saying, like, hey, they attended, you have that evidence right there. Please make sure that you're completing the Padlets and then complete the exit ticket at the end of the session. That's what we'll be using. And finally, if you love social media, make sure that you are hopping on and sharing today's session at EAD Roadmap and hashtag EAD Roadmap. Share any exciting discussion points that you're hearing, anything that's super interesting and engaging there. And I'm going to, we have people that are continuing to jump on, which is great. Okay, and let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, and I always give the disclaimer, my second screen is on the side. So if I'm staring over here, it's because I'm looking at the second screen as I'm talking to you all. So just keep that in mind, but I'm so excited. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight, really diving into some great conversation. And for those of you who are brand new to today's session, we are going to do a little bit of a foundation of EAD and kind of refreshing that for you. And those of you who are returning, sit back, relax. Okay, you can recall some of the important elements of the EAD roadmap, and we'll go through this. I will say, if you're brand new today, this first piece might seem a little speedy, but not to worry. We have some full recordings that go into a little more depth about the EAD roadmap. Thank you, Emma. And Emma is here. She's dialing in. She's our Chief Education Officer at iCivics. It's always wonderful when she's with us. So we're going to get going. It is 7:07. We are going to get going and so excited. So since there's some of you that are new, we just wanted to do a quick review. EAD, Educating for American Democracy, you'll hear us refer to that constantly throughout the session, was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education. And it was really led by Circle, iCivics, Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And one of the key elements about the roadmap is that while we had these core leaders driving the conversation, there were over 300 contributors that joined in and shared thoughts, ideas, perspective, and helped deepen this work. So when you're reading the roadmap, there's so many wonderful minds behind it. Now, when we think about what the roadmap is, the EAD roadmap is an inquiry-based content framework that provides guidance for excellence in civics and history instruction for all learners. Yet, since the roadmap is a framework and not a curriculum or a mandate, it provides states and districts the flexibility to use the roadmap to deliver excellent history and civic learning that leans into essential discussions around topics like reflective patriotism. It also encourages a telling of America's plural yet shared story through a more complete and honest accounting of the past, both the good and the bad. And in just a moment, we're going to dive into the 7 themes that are organized across 4 grade levels, or 4 grade bands, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. Now, as we talk throughout our session, you'll hear us reference some of the core documents for EAD, which includes the EAD report, which contains the theory, the rationale, and approach to the roadmap, the EAD roadmap, which contains the 7 themes across 4 grade bands, and finally, the pedagogy companion, which describes the 6 pedagogical core principles in that document. And Michael is also dropping all of those different core documents into the chat so that if you haven't downloaded them yet, definitely go ahead and download them now. Okay, so as we dive in, we are going to dive into the roadmap structure and really take a closer look at theme 4, a new government and constitution, where we will explore the institutional history of the United States and constitutional design. As we think about the roadmap structure, it's really important to think about how the roadmap provides multiple layers of questions to guide conversations and instruction that gradually become more focused. So where we start with our design challenges at the very top, which address the dilemmas in history and civics content, then we get more focused with our content themes, which have big ideas with history and civics thematic questions and key concepts. And then we get a little more focused with our driving questions, which are history and civics driving questions to drive the more long-term planning. And finally, we get down to our sample guiding questions. Now, these sample guiding questions really frame history and civic concepts for shorter inquiries. So as we talk about all these multiple layers of inquiry, they're all connected and all flow together. So as we think about these 5 design challenges, they really encourage educators to lean into that tension that arises in history and civic instruction, rather than shy away from those challenging concepts. And today we're really diving into design challenge number 3, which is simultaneously celebrating and critiquing compromise. Design challenge 1 and 2 really have us thinking about how can we help students understand the full context of their role as civic participants without creating paralysis and a sense of insignificance. Design challenge 2 is then having us think about how can we integrate the perspective of Americans from all different backgrounds in narrating our history, e pluribus versus unum. And if you're really interested in diving deeper in design challenge 1 and 2, we'll put a little bit later, we'll drop the links for our previous sessions where we really connected those themes and design challenges in those sessions. And today, as we think about design challenge number 3, we're really diving into how do we simultaneously teach the value and danger of compromise for a free and diverse and self-governing people? And also, how do we help students make sense of that paradox that Americans continuously disagree about the ideal shape of self-government, but also agree to preserve shared institutions? So we see this tension back and forth as we think about our Constitution, as we think about the different values that we see there, and really see that tension. How do we understand that while there's agreement and disagreement at the same time, and how we balance those conversations? Now, alongside those design challenges, we have these 7 themes. Now, these 7 themes really help you rethink and reprioritize what goes into your curriculum, allowing you to develop an educational plan that really holistically teaches the full complexity of American history and civics in a way that's more deeply engages your local student population, really thinking about that. And as our roadmap is organized by 7 themes across those 4 grade bands, the roadmap gradually dives deeper into concepts by anchoring each theme with 2 overarching thematic questions, 1 from history and 1 from civics. Now, these 7 content themes map out the disciplinary and conceptual terrain, as well as the skills and dispositional learning needed to support healthy civic participation. So as I mentioned earlier, today we are actually going to be diving in to theme number 4, a new government and constitution. And let's go ahead and take a closer look at that. So as we explore a new government and constitution, I will say, I think this is one of our shortest descriptions because it's so explicit and so concrete in terms of how this theme really explores the institutional history of the United States, as well as the theoretical underpinning of constitutional design. And as you glance at those thematic questions there, you can really see how we have those history thematic questions that really prompt us to think about how our government has formed and how civic participants have changed its shape over time. But then we have our civics thematic question. And Donna, I'm going to see if I can make that a little bit bigger for you there. We'll see if that works a little bit better for you, Donna. Sorry, little comment in the chat that it would be nice if the font was larger. And if you need help reading the font a little bit closer, you can also download the roadmap. Michael will put the link into the chat, so that way you can look. It's the exact same text right there. So that's if you need to increase it even more in size. We'll see if that helps just a smidge for you. So as you look at the civics thematic questions, you can really see where these are thinking about some of those tough concepts in terms of what is power, what's the Constitution and its purpose, what is law, really getting at some of those root elements of the Constitution. And so one of the other key elements of the roadmap and each of the themes are these key concepts. Now, part of the reason that we stop here and talk about the key concepts is one of my favorite aspects of the roadmap is that it builds vertically, and there's vertical alignment across K-12. Now, that's something, as a former elementary teacher, that is something that I'm always like, yes, we need to make sure that we're bringing back those conversations to our youngest learners. And we can see where concepts that we're starting to build a foundation in K-5, like examining the principles and purpose of constitutional democracy and the extent to which US constitutional democracy has lived up to those principles, we can see where that concept then becomes a little more complicated in 612, and where it's not just understanding and examining them, but it's actually exploring the past and present efforts to adapt and redesign the US Constitution, political institutions over time. So here we take that in 612, we take that foundation that was established and really go a little bit deeper. We also see where in K-5, we're exploring concepts of fairness, unfairness, freedom, and equality in the classroom and community and government, and where we start in that local space where our youngest learners can really grapple with the concepts and understandings, and then where it then moves into these exploring those relationships in a much broader sense and thinking about equality, equity, justice, freedom, and order within our American constitutional democracy. So we see that connection, we see that growth, we see this foundation that is being established in K-5 and then gradually deepens in 612. Now this font still might be a little bit tiny, Donna. Sorry about that. As we think about those driving questions. So we've stopped, we've looked at those design challenges, we've looked at those thematic questions, those key concepts, and now we're taking another step down and looking at those driving questions. I will say that this theme specifically has several driving questions as soon as you get into that 6 through 12, those 6 through 12 grade bands. So not all of them are listed because the font would be way too tiny, as Donna pointed out. So that's why not all of them are listed there. Keeping that in mind, trying to make sure we don't have to break out the magnifying glasses in our session for today. But as we see in K-2, we see through our history driving questions, where were there conflicts between different groups of people when they got together for the first time? What happened between different groups of people, really thinking about that relationship, really thinking about how they interacted, and thinking about what does it mean to be a community? How do we decide to be a community? And what are the benefits and the costs of being part of a community? We can see where it then becomes a little bit more complicated in 3.5, 6.8, and 9.12. Okay, thinking about why did various groups or territories compete in North America for land, thinking about how we then also, from a civics perspective, how does our particular form of government support freedom and equality? Okay, and you can see over time, I'm not going to read all of the questions to you, but you can see where we gradually become more complex as we progress through those grade levels. So seeing where we can establish that foundation in K2 about these complicated and complex topics, and then getting into 9-12 and seeing where we're really thinking about those deep and reflective questions. Was the American Revolution a civil war? Okay, so think about how that question really can shift the way we talk about the American Revolution and how we think about that conversation. Now, we sped through the design challenges, the themes, the key concepts, and we've kind of just started to scratch the surface across all of those. And what I would love for you to do is take a moment and think about how can the EAD roadmap really start to deepen student learning around the founding of our constitutional democracy. I'm going to go back to our questions on the previous slide because I do not expect you to have memorized them like that, but just take a moment and on your landing page for today, I'm going to scroll down so that you can see it. On our landing page for today, go ahead and jot down any initial thoughts that you're starting to see. And on my screen, you are going to see the questions that we just asked before. So that way, not expected to memorize them. Stop, look, take a deeper glance. And again, if you need a larger version, you can download the roadmap. There's also the interactive roadmap that is available online that you can also access. And definitely safe driving, please. If you're in the car, safe travels. Just taking a moment, thinking about where we see those connections, where we see how these questions can spark inquiry that really deepen the understanding and deepen the conversations of constitutional democracy in your classroom, that you might not have approached the content from that perspective before. This is where wait time in the virtual space is wonderful. And this is also the joy of using Padlets. I know some of you are stopping, you're thinking, try and decide what to write. So I'll give you just another moment to kind of think, process, and think about that. And while you are pondering and starting to make those connections, I am going to go back and start Curry's introduction. We always know it's nice to give the formal introduction when we have our amazing guests today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're actually going to come back to the 6 core pedagogical principles. I'm going to zoom ahead. We're going to come back to the core pedagogical principles right before I introduce Jason. We're going to change it up. There we go. So as I mentioned before, I am so excited to have Curry Sauntner with us here today. She is the Chief Learning Officer at the National Constitution Center. So excited to have you. She's the Chief Learning Officer. In her current role, she oversees all aspects of the public's on-site experience and leads the center's national education effort. So she helps drive the development, distribution of programs, online offerings. She leads the development of interactive programs for students, teachers, public, theatrical productions, educational videos, and standard-based classroom materials. So she does it all. And we're so excited that she is with us today. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so that Curry can drive her slides, and we are going to jump right in.
Thank you so much, Natasha. That was great. That was a really fun intro. It made me sound much more fun than I am. I'll try to bring it home with everybody today. So hello, everybody. Excited to see you. I'm so excited to be here in this conversation and to listen to everything that's gone on so far and after me as well. This is like going to a visit to your cousin's house. You feel at home and you feel like it's your people, but it's definitely a little bit different than your world, and that's awesome and exciting as well. So we love iCivics. We love working with the EAD roadmap, and we have a lot of stuff coming that's going to be aligned directly with it. So I'm excited to kind of sneak peek some of those things. I'm also excited that a lot of our teachers that we work with are on here tonight. So some of them who are also building this work with us can share as well. So let me do a screen share real quick. I think I totally moved my screen. I prepped it and then I changed it because that's what I always do. I'll give you a little bit about the Constitution Center. And then I thought what will be really fun, and you're all going to roll your eyes when I say it, is a little bit of discussion on that tension. Because I think that tension is so brilliant to bring up in our classrooms with our students, but it's something that all of our teachers, all of our administrators, and to be honest with you, most of our country is grappling with right now. We serve everybody, teachers, students, parents, community members, adults, what I lovingly refer to as like the foamers, the people that get so excited about the Constitution that they foam, all of these people that we engage, but everybody's grappling with this. So I thought it might be nice to take 10 minutes and have that discussion together. And then we go back to the EAD roadmap. And I feel like my job was to show you great resources, but I might overwhelm you because I spent about 2 hours connecting dots and crosswalking the NCC content with the EAD roadmap. And I had to like calm myself because you think your font was small. Mine was getting down to like 8. And I was like, okay, you don't need to put everything on there. They get the point. Everything on the PowerPoint is linked. I can share everything with you as well. So feel free to not worry about anything that you need to take notes on. It will all be given to you and you'll be able to use it, link it, and see the direct connections. So let's get started. We are a national organization that is all about teaching the United States Constitution. We have a museum, which you're looking at right there. It is a beautiful museum in Philadelphia. I was joking earlier, but I like to be really honest how much I love Philadelphia. You know, the place that invented democracy and the Constitution in the United States. We're really excited about that. We're actually, if you were standing on our front lawn and made a right in a 180, you'd be looking at Independence Hall. So we've got a fantastic location. The land has so much history. It's the Lenape Indian land. There were thousands of generations that lived on this land for years and years. It is the most historic square mile in the United States and has been one of the most diverse locations in Philadelphia and in the country as well. When they built our building, it became one of the largest dig sites in the world, rivaling Egypt, which was really hard for me to believe. So I had to ask the Park Service that question 500 times. And they're, Curry, we're not kidding. It was rivaling Egypt. I was like, wow. But just because the land is so rich and so many people have lived on it and so many diverse and different stories, one of the first African-American churches in Philadelphia is right there on the right-hand side of our building. That's the land that was there. So our building sits in this great, amazing location, but our organization understands that our job is to reach across the country and across the world, to be honest, especially in the last 2 years, and engage in the dialogue and discussion around democracy, around the Constitution, around all these principles that we are founded on and how we understand them today. So it's a fantastic place to work. And if you're ever in Philadelphia, always know that teachers are always free. And I'm almost always in that building. So if you're around, please come and look me up because I would love to meet you and love to kind of walk you through the building. Great new exhibits as well. So a little bit about an overall of who we are. So we are the Museum of We the People. We also have a robust, what I refer to as, I don't think the team likes me saying this, but I say it anyway, the adult education series. So it's America's Town Hall. That is the podcast, the blogs, and the town halls. And these are foundationally huge and really wonderful for our AP kids, but really also for the adults. Like, this is for us. This is for us to come and hear from the top constitutional scholars, the top historians from multiple perspectives, coming to the table and having a dialogue and really engaging with this and this content to build our skills and to build our knowledge as well. So the tools are just unbelievable, and the team is constantly putting that out over and over again. The other kind of grouping that we have is the headquarters for civic education. So this is the work we do nationally with civic education. And we do everything, as Natasha walked through, from live classes to civil discourse, community building, to teacher trainings, to online curriculum, to videos, so many things. It's really fun. It keeps us moving, and we're continuing to grow. Everything we do, no matter if it's at the museum, in the town halls, or the blog, or the podcast, or with any of our civic education work, our scholar exchanges or anything, we use this foundation to build upon how we teach. So at our core, we teach all about we the people. We teach about historical foundations through storytelling. We know that, you tell a good story and people are hooked. We also know, because the research tells us, that storytelling is the best way for humans to communicate and hold on to knowledge and pass it along. And funny enough, constitutional law is best learned and best retained through great storytelling. And so it really is the foundation of what we believe is the best way to teach. And then on top of it is the best way to teach the Constitution and the history of our people and our struggles as well. We frame all of that around constitutional thinking skills. So we base everything we do and all of our tools we build around what is the core constitutional question at the heart of this case, at the heart of this struggle, at the heart of this story, at the heart of the Constitution, at the heart of that amendment. What is that constitutional question? And what we try to do is engage in civil discourse and dialogue and practice around it. And that's the top of kind of our work that we do. So we put in front of our students, our teachers, our communities, our police officers, everybody we work with, the constitutional question, and begin with asking, what may the government do? So we don't like to ask the question, what should the government do? It's a great question, and it's a fantastic political question, but we want to start with students and our communities. What's the constitutional question? Let's start with, what may it do? What is it not allowed to do? Because, hey, by the way, that Constitution is limiting. And so where does it have power? Where does it derive its power? Where does it not have power? And what may it do and what may it not do? From there, it's almost like you talk about the Constitution as a centerpiece in the middle of your table. And you all get to discuss and debate around that as a core piece that you're engaging with. It very much takes the UI out of it for a little bit and gives us practice building skills on healthy civil discourse and dialogue. And that's kind of where we want to get to. It's great that we tell stories, fantastic that we give constitutional questions, but if we're not talking about it and we're not having dialogues, what does it matter? We need to practice those skills and behaviors and use it everywhere. And what we have found with our work and our research is that when we practice these skills, we see our students and we see the people that do the work start to be able to take those behaviors and take that process and use it outside the constitutional question, to take it outside that norm and then reset up a new norm and still have those behaviors of healthy, robust civil dialogue. One thing I like to clarify around civil dialogue, I hear a lot of people say like, oh, you have to be civil. I have to be honest, and this is like, it's 7:30 at night for me. I want to be really clear that I don't mean devoid of emotion, because if I'm ever telling anybody to be devoid of emotion, then that's the biggest hypocrite that it can be. I'm very emotional, mostly excitable and happy, but still, like, it's really important that your emotions are a part of the conversation. And, I heard somebody a few weeks ago doing a commentary on a debate that did not go well. And what he said, it was the best line ever. And what he said was, I like a spirited debate, but you can't be a jerk. And I was like, that is the best way to say it. You need to have a healthy civil dialogue. And we as facilitators and educators need to ensure that we're building a process with our students that allows them and affords them the ability to have a healthy civil dialogue, and also allows and affords them for that reflection to understand, what? I need to take a break. I need to tap out for a minute, or I'm having trouble getting this through and I need some help so I don't get frustrated, and really give them those skills to be able to continue a dialogue, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult. And what are all the tools to make that successful and to encourage it to keep moving forward in the right way and in a healthy way. You know what? We all say it, sometimes taking a break, taking a walk around the corner and having some process time is the best thing you can do. And we need to make sure we're building that into our system. So this is kind of the framework of how we teach. And of course, the Constitution is what we teach, and which is really fun. But as we kind of dive into what's next, and we've already changed the names on these, so I constantly have to redo my slides and haven't done that yet. We're building a Constitution 101 course. It's a 15-week long course, a full curriculum, top to bottom, educational instruction, tons of materials, lessons, activities, assessments as well. 15-week course. We're starting with high school students. We're targeting towards a high school audience. It is going to be on the Constitution. It is going to begin with civil discourse and dialogue practice. It will then go into topics like principles of the American Revolution, foundations of the Constitutional Convention, all the way through to slavery in America, voting rights in America, Article 5, amending the Constitution, and of course, my favorite, the 14th Amendment, equality and justice. So we'll really be able to engage in all those pieces. So that course we're in mid-development of right now. Jen Jolly, who's on here, I'm just waving to Jen, is one of our teachers in our Teachers Advisory Board who's helping us develop the curriculum. And we're working with a group of constitutional scholars, groups of teachers, and a curriculum development firm to be able to build that entirely out. It is based off of primary sources. So at the same time, because there's an issue at the National Constitution Center where we can't just do one project, we like to do 5. We are also building the Founders Library, which is what I've been lovingly calling not your grandfather's Founders Library. So it would be like Madison got that trunk from Jefferson, but it was today. And you open up the trunk and it's every great speech from David Walker's appeal to Prince Hall. I saw him in the EAD as well, to Madison's notes, to the Virginia notes from Jefferson, all a mix of great materials. Now, if you didn't know about the Constitution Center, one of the things we are top at is working with the top constitutional scholars across the ideological spectrum to come to the table and to share common ground and say, on the Constitution, what do you agree upon? And then where do your opinions diverge? That's what the Interactive Constitution is all about. It's a grouping of essays from, Article 1 of the Constitution to the 27th Amendment. It's hundreds and hundreds of essays where scholars that were ideologically opposed, but the top scholars in that area came together. That formula has worked so well for us to be able to say, hey, this material is nonpartisan because it's coming from multiple perspectives of the best top scholars. We're doing the same thing with the Founders Library. So each almost like time band has expert historians who are ideologically opposed to each other, and they come together and they pick their favorite, their top, their best teaching primary sources. Each gets to pick 10, each have to agree on the other person's 10, and then they have to write a summary of why it's important and then pull excerpts from it or the parts that like they don't want you to miss. So we're super excited to be able to get kids closer to the Constitution and get kids closer to these founding documents, but at the same time, not overwhelm them and not make them feel like they aren't something that they can obtain and aren't something that they can engage with. So we're building modifications and modifications and tools around that so kids can access this material. And it's a really strong multi-partisan perspective, all led in the Constitution and historian pieces. Now, as we dive into like looking at all of this work and how we do this, I have to be really clear that this work happens because we build community. We build communities of teachers that can have civil discourse. We build communities of our parents, our general community, our community in Philadelphia, across the nation, and of our students. So much is key that is being led on that civic engagement of us working together to build these tools and to engage in this. And when I talked earlier about building process, we have an entire module on the Constitution, conversations, and civil dialogue. It comes with a toolkit that is not only a teacher-facing toolkit, but a student-facing toolkit. And this map that you see to your right is what we refer to as, we call it a modified Harkness, which is a conversation and a dialogue method that came out of Massachusetts. Fantastic. We kind of modified it. We kind of changed it around. They have a very set number. It's 8 students that can engage in it. We have done modified Harknesses up to about 80 to 100 students. And our teachers have done it with full auditoriums of students, teachers doing Harknesses with teachers. But it's all about civil dialogue and engagement practices. If we can't come to the table and have a discussion and dialogue around this, then how can we move things forward together as a community? And everything about the Constitution's structure, principles, and foundations is based off of civil discourse and dialogue. It's rooted in civil discourse and dialogue. the whole point of this system working is that we have dialogue, discussion, opposing viewpoints, and we move along and we hear different ideas and we expand our own thoughts and processes about it. So as we engage in the content, we have to at the exact same time hold true to the practice of discourse and dialogue and have to hold those two things together at all times. I feel like this is a running theme with me. So you're going to notice that I do a lot of hand gestures where I'm holding two things together at all times, because it feels like a very much a theme going on in our country right now when we're engaging in topics and tension. So, you know, at the center, we try to think of them as the topics are in tension, but the people don't have to be. And how do we engage and push and move each other forward? So the key to EAD, one of the key kind of leading components, is simultaneously celebrating and critiquing compromise. So when I thought about this for tonight's presentation, I was like, well, what part of the Constitution will I not be able to talk about with this topic? Because it's all over. If you do a historical timeline, it's all over. If you any part of the Constitution, it's in there. It's like ragu, like that old commercial around ragu. It's definitely in there. So when I started to kind of like parse it out and start thinking through, I started thinking, like, first we begin with Patrick Henry. You know, Patrick Henry saying, "Give me liberty or give me death," prior to the Constitution. But very soon after the Constitution, writing a letter, speaking out loud and saying, how can I, this person who stood up and fought for independence, who fought for natural rights, and still you hear those words that I have said about give me liberty and give me death, be a person who enslaves other humans. So when we go into the dialogue and we look at that tension with our founding, how can we look at the words of, you know, the Declaration that all men are created equal, and at the same time watch the laws be embedded from the 1660s and 1640s on in states like the New England states that ensure that slavery is no longer just imposed on one person, but becomes inheritable from mother to child. It's chattel slavery. We shift the entire system of slavery in America by putting it into laws and having it connected. So at the same time, we're looking at Patrick Henry, not saying he didn't know. He's calling himself out in that letter. He's saying, how can I be these two people at the same time? How can we have the Declaration and enslavement at the same time? So much of what we teach is looking at that amazing feat of the Constitution, and then also tragedy of the embedding of slavery in the Constitution with the 3/5 Compromise, the slave trade lasting another 20 years, and other stipulations directly and indirectly in that Constitution. So it is about how we teach the Constitution, how we utilize these primary sources, and how we grapple with celebrating and understanding what compromise comes out with. So I kind of went through and just like ticked through the years, and I thought like another kind of juxtaposition that we're seeing in this is that powerful fight for freedom of Harriet Scott, who understands completely the inheritability of slavery to her daughters and what will happen to them. And she is the one that initiates the decision that goes to the courts, the Dred Scott decision. It's actually Harriet and her friend who are looking at their daughters and saying, we will not let this happen. They push the suit because they understand the law, and they understand that the law says the mother is the line of enslavement. And that is where it follows through. And that then moves to Dred Scott because he's a man, and then pushes to the Taney decision. So how do we look at Harriet's unbelievable strength, courage to defend and uphold her family and fight for equality and freedom, and also read the words of Taney, and that there is no rights that the Black man is bound by the United States because they are not citizens. How do we grapple with those two? I can continue to go on. I look at the 14th Amendment and the glory, I know I should stop this, the glory of the 14th Amendment and that beautifulness of the Colored People's Convention calling for our country to put the Declaration of Independence in that Constitution, and then it being embedded in the Constitution with the 14th Amendment. And then the pushback after a short, brief moment of beautiful interracial democracy with the end of Reconstruction and the Jim Crow laws and the courts either gutting or nullifying all the work of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And then also looking at the great dissenter of John Marshall Harlan being the only one that says, no, 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 we do not have a caste system in this country. This is not who we are. And this is exactly about race when you do this work. And so we have to do this work. We have to pull it back and forth. Now, I just gave you kind of my favorite conversations where we can hold these two together and feel a sense of amazement by the work that was done. And at the same time, huge tragedy of the work that was done, and say, how did they do this at the same time? But we have to look at all of it together to really fully understand the impact and then how it affects us today. But what I would love, and we have a Jamboard that I can definitely drop in the chat, but what I would also love, so you can do one of two things. I'm going to stop share for a sec. I'm going to do the Jamboard because I clearly can't do two things at once tonight, so I have to say it out loud. But what I'd love to know from you all, what's your favorite class activity, story, thing? You can put it in the Jamboard or you can say it out loud because I'm totally cool with that too, if that's all right with Natasha. Cool, thumbs up. I would love to know, what is your favorite to put together? This is like, what does Oprah do, her favorite things? But this is like the teacher Constitution nerd version of it. Let's play. Do anyone want to jump in? I'll give it a minute. I have terrible wait time, just so we're clear. And because I worked in a kindergarten classroom and they're great at like instantly giving you answers. Love the kindergartners. But does anybody have kind of a moment where they find that, and you can also have one that you're struggling with too, that you're like, you know what, I really want to teach this moment, but I can't find the right kind of multiple perspective look at it. I've been having this real difficulty around some of the modules that we're developing for the course. And how do I really kind of put these pieces together at the same time so we can look at it as a whole? Give it one more minute.
Okay, this is Kimberly. I'll go.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Well, it's no surprise. I love talking about the Supreme Court and how people think it's undemocratic. But to me, I think it's maybe the most democratic because it's been created since the Constitution and further explored and defined by our representative body. And so the Constitution is very limited on what it says about the Supreme Court, only mentioning the Chief Justice once. And we've democratically created what is now the Supreme Court through a process. So I don't look at it as undemocratic. I think it's very democratic branch of government.
Love that. And I'm totally with you. I can't remember which justice said it, and I will totally remember and share it with everybody, but because I think it might have been Hamilton actually, but because it bases its ruling off of the Constitution, and the Constitution was the most democratic of any of our content and our materials and our systems, because of the ratifying conventions and the fact that the ratifying conventions were so open and so broad, that it is, when it aligns with the values of the Constitution, it is aligning with we the people, and therefore makes it the most democratic branch. So I'm with you, Kimberly. That was a good share.
This is Peter from Minnesota. And one of the things that we started talking about today, because we just started the Constitution this week, was this idea of failure and near failure. And how in reality, this should not have made it this far. And it hasn't been a lack of our ability to try and kill it. Even from the very beginning, it was a near catastrophe. So how in the world did this mess ever get to this point? It was, again, if you look at the Articles of Confederation and what a near catastrophe that was, and then they had to rewrite something for which they didn't have a legal mandate to do, and then they come up with something new called a constitution, which not everybody agreed on. yet became the legally binding law of this country, which most people didn't even realize was happening. So by all stretch of the imagination, this thing should have imploded decades ago, and yet it hasn't. So what is so captivating, and why is it so important for us to protect this document?
I love that so much. That is fantastic. It is so unbelievably interesting to kind of like put those positions together, and also it teaches like the big risks and the big moment that they were really at when they were writing the Constitution. 2 weeks ago, we had Jill Lepore on for one of our classes, and she was totally in alignment with you. She was saying like, this is one of the things that they talk about in their class. And one of the things is they say, we the people, but they really didn't have any clue what we the people was gonna be. So they're like, yeah, we the people. And they're like, wait, we gotta figure out what that means. Like, are we counting the voters? Are we counting the non-voters? Who are we counting? What? It didn't exist before in humankind. This concept of we the people did not exist. So they were inventing We the People, which is the new book on my reading list that I'm going to get that you recommended. But I love the way that you looked at the failures or near failures and what is the reason it made it through. I love that kind of lining that you're thinking around that. And it sounds really fun to be in your class too. So awesome share. Anybody else want to share? We'll do one more if somebody wants to jump in. We don't have to. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up real quick with what I wanna, I'll share again. Get off my Jamboard. There you go. There we go, right one. Okay, cool. Okay, so what I did that I thought would be helpful, and again, I will send this to, or Natasha will make sure that everybody, I'm not. Natasha will make sure that everybody has this. So I really love the sample guiding questions. And I went through all the materials again for like the 800th time because I love EAD. And again, we're aligning our course to it. And I saw that if you guys go on the website, it's fantastic of how many ways they cross-connected. So you don't have to figure out how to do some of these questions or some of these tasks. They say like, oh, if you want some help, here's a few things. So one of the things that I noticed was the sample guiding questions. And I started hyperlinking them. So at first I got super excited because I could see, oh, just in this one sample guiding question, we have 2 different modules that are full entire toolkits, from videos to lesson plans to briefing documents, which one of our teachers made me laugh so hard because she said the only thing they are not is briefs. They're research papers on the topic. So anything you wanted on a research paper, we did for you and we put on this document. And then there's images and slides. There's worksheets for the activities, there's Kahoots, everything. So I started going through and just pulling a few and saying, here, the connections to direct connections from the history sample guides questions to the materials at the National Constitution Center website. I couldn't stop myself, and then I was running out of font space because I could connect to every single one of them. But I thought this would be a better tool for you all to be able to dive into. And I did do every grade from 3rd through 12th. I taught kindergarten, so I know what K through 2 does, and it got a little sketchy when we got to that range. But we are going to be building materials for the younger grades soon, so we'll be able to add that probably in about a year or 18 months. But you'll be able to go through one by one and dive into these pieces. What I have, all of these pieces are all listed on this piece right here. So if you go to the In the Classroom section of the Constitution Center's website, you'll be able to see 31 different learning modules on the Constitution that are full kits. We've built them over the last 2 years, and they have everything that you want. And it is everything from the articles to the amendments to the themes around the Constitution. So voting rights, separation of powers and checks and balances, federalism, ratification, and that's in Article 5, but all those pieces, slavery in America. So the themes that fit directly in the Constitution and the themes that are more global and conversational around the Constitution. It is a plethora. As you dive in there, if you need anything from us, you can always email me. You can follow me on Twitter, and a lot of teachers message me on Twitter, and I'm totally cool with that too. Anything you need, our team, I'll get back to you. Probably my team will get back to you as well. and we'll help you out. We do live programs every single week on, I don't know what day it is, on Friday. So whatever day Friday is from today, one of our classes is on the Bill of Rights, and Erwin Shermaninsky is coming in to teach it. So we like to also bring top scholars into the classroom so kids can ask questions to the scholars as well. We can do that privately, we can do it publicly. We bring classrooms together to have dialogues, but it's really all about let's engage in civics together, and let's make sure our third graders and our kindergartners are also still asking questions to the top scholars in the world. They can handle it, and I've trained them very well on how to talk to kids. So we're doing really good together. We love talking about the Constitution with everybody. So without further ado, I will wrap up and stop talking.
Thank you, Carrie. It was wonderful. So I'm going to give you a moment as I introduce Jason and do just a quick tidbit on the 6 core pedagogical principles and share my screen. But what I would love for you to do is take a moment and think about what really resonated with you from the concepts and thoughts that Curry shared, and thinking about where do you want to continue to dive deeper as we think about the principles and purpose of the Constitution. And so that opportunity is right on your landing site for today. I'm going to go ahead and we are going to continue diving in. There we go. So prior to Curry's session and really talking about those different elements of tension that we see and issues of compromise and how we address those topics in compromise, I wanted to come back to the pedagogical companion, the EAD pedagogy companion. Great. It's the 3rd core document that you're going to see from the trifecta. And part of the reason that I love the 6 core principles is because what it really does is it really begins to set the foundation of the learning dispositions and environment that has to be established in order to get into those rich inquiries. As Curry mentioned before, we have to think about what the community looks like and feels like in the classroom so that we can get into these really kind of thought-provoking topics. So very exciting to see, to have that laid out there. And we see where core principles 1, 2, and 3 are thinking about how are we maintaining high expectations? How are we thinking and reflecting on our students and the learning? How are we thinking about our EAD-ready classrooms and school, understanding that both of them have to be working together in order to get there. And then finally, when we have that foundation established, that's when we can really think about how are we having inquiry as the primary mode of learning, really centering that, and then how are we continuing on to not only think about the inquiry and the textbook, but think beyond that, okay? Moving into the practices of constitutional democracy, and then assessing, reflecting, and continuing to improve. And in this situation, assessment not necessarily being those huge summative assessments, but where are those little check-ins that we're getting so that we can continue to improve learning and improve those experiences for our students. Now, one core principle that I do want to bring to the surface before I introduce Jason, formally introduce, is core principle number 5. And when we think about core principle number 5 and those practices of constitutional democracy and student agency, thinking about how are we getting experiences in and beyond the classroom, how are we making sure that the learning is active learning, there's student collaboration, there's student reflection. And within the pedagogy companion, what you're also going to see is you're going to be able to see teacher moves and student moves that really help frame out, okay, what are the steps and the actions that a teacher could take in the classroom in order to really provide that space for students to actually engage and practice those skills. We see that practicing happening in science. We see science experiments. We see those performances that are happening with ELA, but this is where we actually get the opportunity to practice those skills and apply that knowledge that we're learning through those deep and rigorous inquiries in these situations. And you see, we have both teacher moves and student moves, understanding that everyone needs to be doing different pieces at different points of time to deepen learning. It cannot just be a kind of stand and receive. And so now that we've kind of taken a moment, just thought about that, just introduced that core principle number 5. And I am so excited for us to actually think about the EAD roadmap in the classroom. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Jason. I'm still going to drive the slides, But
Okay.
I'm so excited to welcome Jason Stern here, middle school teacher from Pennsylvania. He's 20 plus years experience teaching both private and public settings. And for the last 16 years, he's been teaching middle school. And so we're so excited. He loves teaching civics and really thinking about how he makes it engaging, facilitating mock trials, encouraging debates, kind of really playing that devil's advocate. So we're so excited that he is here today. And I am going to mute myself and we're going to dive right in.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being invited here. I know here on the East Coast, I'm on the East Coast. I know it is approaching teacher bedtime here for many, so I will not be offended by any yawns or anything like that. I know most of you have had a full day, probably up since 5 o'clock. So I appreciate you being here right now. I really, really do. Like as was said, my name is Jason Stern. I teach 8th grade social studies and civics in Pennsylvania, and I've been asked to present on the EAD theme for a new government and constitution, but through the perspective of how do I create student engagement in these topics, going through the roadmap and trying to really get students involved. So one of the first ways that I do, well, first of all, I thought back to how did I first become engaged in the Constitution and in government? And I thought back to my 8th grade social studies class, sort of ironic that that's what I teach now. But I remember we were going through the Revolution and going into the Constitution, and the teacher handed out a worksheet, and it had court cases involving students in schools and students suing the schools. And I was like, wait a minute, students can sue the schools? First of all, that got my attention. And second of all, I was like, wait, and some of them won? I was like, whoa, this is pretty interesting. And I think I even remember going up to the teacher and saying, like, are these real? And him saying, yes, go sit back down and do your work. But that got me interested, thinking that, wow, what is going on in government? First of all, students can become involved in that through the school. And second of all, decisions made by this Supreme Court can affect what I do in my little town in Pennsylvania, what I can do here. That sort of planted a seed for me. And I, sort of stuck with that through my career. And at one point thought I would be a lawyer, but then realized I like talking about the law more than I would actually like practicing it. So I went into teaching. So that's how I got first engaged in the Constitution and in government. But now, as you can see on this screen here, so many ways we have now in 2022 to engage kids in the Constitution. We have the gamification of learning, which iCivics does a wonderful job with. We have, I think, millions, billions of podcasts out there, and some of them are actually good, which I can highlight today. We have more and more court cases being decided with students in schools today. There was one basically an hour from where I am about a student and posting on social media. With social media being involved in the schools, so many more court cases, Supreme Court cases are going to come out. There's simulations that can be done that I'm going to talk about. With so much information out there, you can do some student choice, give students a choice on what they do. And finally, I'm glad that this was mentioned before by Curry, stories. All this other stuff, the gamification, the podcasts, the simulations, like that's novel to us, the older teachers, but to kids, that's sort of normal. Sometimes what's novel to them is just a story about how you were involved in something with the government or something that affected you in the government. And sometimes those are the things that draw kids in, and they're ho-hum about, the technology because they're just used to it. It's sort of become a circle that I've noticed. So if we move on here, these are the themes that are a part of the new government and constitution section. I know they were gone over before, so I'm not going to focus entirely on them. But what I want to highlight from these are, they talk about power, they talk about the rights people have, they talk about laws, all things that kids have probably experienced in some way or another, even if they don't know that they have. So the way I like to start to teach these themes is by saying, well, what would life be like if we didn't have laws, natural rights, a constitution. So that leads us into, I always like to begin by talking about the state of nature and life without government, because I think you can teach best government if you first just sort of strip it all away and say, okay, well, to teach what government is and why we have a government and a president and a mayor, let's take that all away and see what life would be like without government. So one of the first simulations I do, it's a state of nature simulation. It's the one link I couldn't get working here today. But basically, it's a card game type activity where students are given a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of supply. And they have to go around the classroom and basically decide how they can stay in the game or how they can survive. There are rules. There's rules to the activity, but being no police to stop you if someone steals your food, no one to stop you if you get attacked by somebody else, no laws, against anything. And the students just have to survive in this activity. And it can get a little chaotic at times. So you have to know your class and you have to be comfortable with your class. But actually what you find is that a lot of them, and like if you know anything about the natural rights philosophers, students will band together and try to survive through alliances. And if you do a good amount of prep work before and a lot of debriefing afterwards, it can be a really effective way to introduce teaching about government by having them do an activity models life without government. Now, if you're not quite brave enough to do that, or after that, iCivics does a really good job too with some resources about why do we even have government. I've known sometimes in the past I've just gone right into it, but when you ask that question, I think kids understand more. Okay, this is why we might need some laws, or this is why our government might not always be very efficient, because sometimes that's a good thing. So iCivics does a really nice job too. If you want to study the natural rights philosophers, they do a good job giving an overview on that. And there's a link to that information there as well. So another way I really like to engage students is through the gamification of learning. And I'm not just saying this because iCivics asked me to come here tonight, but they do a fantastic job. They are top notch. If you have not explored any of the iCivics resources, they are great. But one thing before I start talking about them, one thing about gamification, sometimes it gets a bad rap. I know with some of teachers I've talked to say, oh, you're just going to play games today in class, or, oh, are you teaching today? Or are you just playing those games? I try to bite my lip and I try to hold back a little bit, but I think games are the perfect way to teach about the Constitution, because what are games but other than using your knowledge to problem solve while learning? It doesn't get much better than that as far as I'm concerned. And all of these games really do a good job. If you're teaching about the ratification of the Constitution, the race to ratify is really good. It gives you the anti-federalists and the federalists, and it makes you take a side, and it makes you try to convince other people that your side is correct. Win the White House, fantastic game for teaching the Electoral College and the electoral process. Takes you all the way from the primaries all the way to the general election, and everything in between. Counties work. I like this one because so many times we deal with the federal level, the top level of government. This takes it down to the counties, and things sometimes kids are more experienced with. Sometimes DC and those things are far away, but what goes on in their community a lot of times affects them more. And I was even thinking about this tonight. I'm going to make a suggestion to iCivics. I think your next game needs to be school board works and how a school board operates, because that is exploding all over the country right now. And I think that would be interesting. Do I Have a Right? My favorite game. If you're teaching about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it has you in a law firm trying to have you match up your clients with the correct amendment. And it's great because it has game qualities and it also has learning, keeps their interest. If you're teaching the 3 branches of government, branches of power, works great. It really shows how the legislative, executive, and judicial branches interact. And right now, we just finished up a unit on foreign policy of the first 5 presidents. And I used Convene the Council to teach how the government goes, how the government, I'm just reading a comment there, save the school board. I like it. I think you should copyright that right now. Convene the Council talks about how foreign policy decisions are made within the government. And certainly you can't get more topical about that than right now with Ukraine and Russia and everything that's going on. So I don't know if that one just came out, and I don't know if you guys planned or had some sort of sixth sense, but that was a perfect outcome right there. So I was very, very happy with that. Now, a couple of tips for using the gamification of learning. If you really want to make it good learning and from start to finish, what I would suggest is you need to preview and debrief the games. It's fine to come in and say, okay, we're playing a game. Everybody go to this website and go, and you put your feet back up and read the newspaper. I know that doesn't happen, but if you preview the games and tell the kids, okay, here's what to expect. Here's some of the concepts you're going to see. Then going in, not only I think they understand it better, but they get so much more out of it. And then also debriefing the games. That I think is the most important. Okay. You just did this. This student did that. This student did that. Well, how is your outcome different? Well, why'd you make the choices that you did? That's where the real learning comes in with these games. And also sometimes, even if you're lucky enough, we're lucky enough in my school district to have a one-to-one. Every student has an iPad. But even if you do, I sometimes make my kids work in groups because then they have to do group decision making. And that's always interesting to see because one wants to do one thing, wants to do the other. And they have to have that discussion first before they go into the game. So not only are they getting the feedback from the screen, but they're getting the feedback from another kid. And another tip, this is secretly enjoy when students get caught playing the games and learning civics during other teachers' classes. Okay, even though I have to say, when another teacher comes up to me and says, oh, I caught one of our kids, he was playing, the do I have a right during math class? And I have to be, okay, I'll talk to him. Well, secretly, I'm a little bit happy because that kid has an iPad. They could go not anywhere. They could go a lot of places on the internet, and they've chosen to play a civics game while they're trying to avoid doing Pythagorean theorem. It makes me smile, but I don't smile in front of the math teacher. But I sort of take a little pride in that they're doing some learning in other classes. But we won't share that with any other content areas. So another way I like to engage students in the learning of civics is through student choice. With so many different resources out there, students can have a choice in what they learn about. You might want to introduce concepts in the government, but then you can go to some podcasts like Civics 101, 60 Second Civics, C-SPAN Classroom. They might be interested. They might be learning a little bit about the confirmation process of the Supreme Court justices. Well, Civics 101 has a whole bunch of different things on how they confirm what a Supreme Court justice does. Okay, they might be interested in the military. Civics 101 does things on the nuclear codes and nuclear weapons and how are those managed. Okay, and 60 Second Civics is just what it sounds like. Okay, you got a minute, you can learn civics. I use that a lot for my opening, sort of bell ringers. All right, listen to one of these. Listen to 60 Second Civics, give me a 10-second summary. And they're really, really good. I recommend all 3 of these because when I've looked for podcasts, it's tough because there's so many out there, but the problem is some are 3.5 hours long. No kid's going to listen to 3.5 hour podcast. Some I'm listening to, oh, this is great. And then it's curse word. And I'm like, oh, can't use that one. So these are made for students. And also, I think very interesting. which, like I said, I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've sort of narrowed it down, but these are great for student choice. Civics 101 has about 300 different podcasts. 60 Second Civics, I don't even know how many they have. C-SPAN Classroom, one thing I'll do with that, and you can go on. One thing I do with that is sometimes I'll have them watch a press conference and pretend they are the person giving the press conference. And then I'll stop the questions and say, okay, how would you answer that if you were the person running the press conference? Or I'll tell them we're going to watch a press conference about this, write a couple questions for that person in government. What would you ask them if you were up there, if you could, get the stage and put them on the spot, put them on the hot seat. And then in my classes just last year, I started to try to have them make podcasts out of podcasts. Sometimes we'll listen to something, we'll do something. Okay, you listen to a 15-minute podcast, make a 60-second podcast out of that. And actually the people at Civics 101 were very nice enough. Last year they zoomed into my classroom and they gave a presentation for about 30 minutes and said, here's how we make podcasts. Here's how the sausage is made, as they say. And that was really good too. But the podcasts are great for student choice. They can pick it. Maybe it's something that interests them. Okay, I always tell them, maybe it sounds interesting. Maybe you like it, maybe you won't, but at least you gave it a shot. So podcasts can be good if you find the right one. Also, this is what brought me in, okay? Using student-centered court cases in order to engage students. Like I said at the beginning, okay? And I put the little graphic up there, sue a school and 8 reasons you should. Whenever you say to students, we're going to talk about suing the school. Oh, that's a hook. That gets them. What? You can sue a school? Okay. And most of them say, oh, it's my dream. All right. I always wanted to sue the school. All right. For whatever injustice they endured in their school years. But there are some very interesting cases. We have New Jersey versus, yes, New Jersey versus TLO. All right. We talk about, okay, what can be searched? Your locker, your pockets, your book bag. I say, this is stuff you need to know. Like, this is important. You need to know when you walk into school, what rights you have. And these court cases teach them wonderfully. They have the Mahoney area school district case just decided last year about social media. Cheerleader who was posting things at home on her social media. Can she be suspended from cheerleading because of stuff she posted at home? Kids are on social media. I say, you have to know this. All right, this is important. You got to know what you can and cannot do. And then the classic, Tinker versus Des Moines, involving protests in school. And I found out just last year, you can follow Mary Beth Tinker, who was one of the kids involved in the case. She's on Twitter. The case occurred 50 years ago, I believe. And you can follow her on Twitter. She sometimes will respond and she's given presentations. And I've taught about her for over 20 years. And it was sort of cool. I sort of nerded out when I found, wow, I could follow her and give her a question. But and there's going to be so many more cases coming out on this in the next couple of years, that this is just an area that explodes, and the kids just have so many questions to go through that, this is one where you can just start a discussion and it just goes. So one activity that I do, and the link up there, National Constitution Center, I didn't even know they were going to be here. But that's a link to some student-centered court cases. If you click on that, they have great resources on student-centered court cases, among anything else. But one activity I like to do with the student-centered court cases is voting with your feet. That's where students will read about a court case or will watch a video about it. And they have to put on put on your judge's robe, or put on your wig, even though they don't do that in American courts, but put on your judge's robe and then write me your decision. I don't tell them the decision yet. What would you do, okay, if you were the judge? I give them a couple minutes to do that. Then I say, okay, everybody who sided with Tinker, go on this side. Everyone sided with TLO, go on that side. And we have a debate. And I really like to focus on trying to have students respond to each other rather than just saying their opinion, because they get into it. Okay, they get into it, and believe it or not, some sometimes do side with the school. And I always tell them, if no one sides with the school, then I get to play and I get to come in. All right, and I get to argue. But we have debates. Sometimes I'll do a continuum. All right, do you somewhat agree, very much agree? And it gets the kids up, it gets them moving around, and it also gets them to share their opinion. And even the ones who don't want to say anything, they still got to tell me what they believe by where they go. Okay, so I know not everyone's comfortable saying it, but you got to give your opinion. You got to at least make a decision. And I've used this activity for a very long time, and it's quite effective. So and you can change it up. You know, you could have one time I said, okay, everybody write your decision. Now everybody's got to go to the other side. Okay, defend the other side. And that's a good challenge for them. And they groan and they moan, but then they get into it. They like it. So those are some activities there. And finally, and I'm so glad Curry mentioned about storytelling, because that has been so effective to me almost accidentally in my classes. Sometimes I'll just tell a story about how, you know, either I've gone to jury duty or I've had this interaction with the police and a speeding ticket, or just anything involving the government. And then just questions come up. Well, what happened when you got called for jury duty, Mr. Stern? Or what could the police do when they pulled you over? Okay. And just storytelling, I think, is so great because it does engage kids, and it's not done as much because so many times they're in front of a screen that just the idea of a teacher telling a story about something that they experienced can be novel, and encourage students. Well, I encourage students to tell stories. Sometimes I say, you know, don't give me any names. All right. But you can tell me what happened, but don't give me any names. So I just like, before I take any questions, and if you have any questions, you know, please, I should have said this at the start, but please put them in the chat. I'll just leave you with one story that I like to tell about one of my interactions with the government. It's probably my best and worst story altogether. We take our students, when we can, we usually take a class to the courtroom, to our local courtroom. It's about 20 minutes away, our county courthouse. And of course, this is pre-COVID. But we would take students in, we get a tour of the courthouse. A lot of times we try to schedule on a day that there was actually a court case. And we've seen a bunch of interesting cases, embezzlement cases. We've seen assault cases, and it's been very interesting. But the one year they said, would you like to tour the jail? And I said, okay, well, it sounded like a good idea when I was sitting in my classroom, and I said yes. But we get there, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm about to take 25 kids into a jail. I sort of doubted my decision making then, but we went in, and there was a very good tour guide. He knew exactly what he was doing. He's taken kids through there before. So I felt very safe. And at the one point he said, okay, we were just in the nonviolent wing, and we were going to go through the cafeteria in the women's prison where there's some women in the cafeteria, and we were going to walk through there. So we start walking through, and I see in the corner of my eye, one of the women starts to stand up, and I'm like, oh boy, what's going to happen right now? And then she looks like she's going to say something, and I'm like, okay, all right. And she says, all of a sudden, blurts out, hi, Mr. Stern. Well, it was one of my former students who was one of the prisoners in the jail. And I didn't quite know what the correct courtesy was for meeting someone while you were walking through the jail, but she was very kind, very nice. And we talked about it. And later we had a long discussion with my students about, well, you know, why might someone be in prison? How does that work? What did she go through? You know, how does she get out? What happens when she gets out? And it brought up a whole lot of questions on something that I never expected to happen. You know, I actually touched base with her later when she was out, and we talked about it because she's in the community and I live in the community. So it was a very interesting interaction that we've had, and I've told that story to my classes. And like I said, it sparked a lot of interest and a lot of discussion. And it's also just one of my favorite stories to tell. So thank you for letting me tell it, because it does have a good ending. And I've kept in touch with that former student, and she's doing well right now. So that's good. So it was sort of a, a happy ending, but a surprising story. So if there are any questions anyone has about any of the activities that I introduced, please let me know. There should be links to everything. If you can access this, I tried to link everything except for that first activity, which I'll work on. But if anyone has any questions or anything, please let me know. If not, thank you so much for listening to me and for inviting me here. It was a lot of fun, and I hope that it was helpful for at least someone.
Jason, it was so wonderful to have you. And I think this is one of the reasons why we always want to make sure we have educator voices in these sessions, because the perspective that you bring, the stories that you tell are just so on the ground, so really connect to other educators in the classroom. So just thank you for taking the time to put it all together. I think that's something too. We know time is precious, especially for all of you classroom teachers. So we really appreciate it. And everything is linked out there. I'm so glad. And the slides are on the landing page for today. And take a moment while I'm going to actually wrap us up, because it's 8:24. But take a moment, and if you scroll down while I'm closing us out for today, add in just what is something that you're going to take away from Jason's conversation, something that really resonated with you, something that you're like, oh, I need to go check that out. Take a moment and jot that down there, because it's always wonderful to think about as an educator, as you're sharing your expertise with others, what's really sticky. So that Padlet is there. You can take a moment, write something that you appreciated. And I am going to actually close us out today, because I do know it's getting close to bedtime here as we get close to the end of our time together. But as Jason had mentioned and Curry had mentioned, the EAD website, if you haven't explored it yet, definitely worth the time checking it out. You can download the roadmap and all of the accompanying documents directly on the website. There's also the interactive roadmap. So if you're one who likes to toggle in between grade levels, look to see how the vertical alignment starts in kindergarten and works its way up. It might just be me, but that's okay. But if you appreciate that toggling and that ability, definitely go ahead and use that interactive roadmap. It also saves paper, which is wonderful. But downloading is great too if you're taking screenshots and things like that. Also, the Educator Resource Library. So Curry mentioned some amazing resources from the National Constitution Center. Jason mentioned tons of resources that he uses in the classroom. And on our website, the Educator Resources section, one of the great things about that section is it's actually been vetted by a team of teachers and content experts, and they're all directly aligned to different themes, design challenges. The coding on the back end is absolutely amazing. And so you can definitely go ahead and explore the Educator Resources. You can filter and sort based upon your needs, which is definitely an advantage and a time saver. I believe we have about a little over 500 resources on the website. And I would say, I think it was 100, maybe a little over 110 resources directly align with theme number 4. And so just to highlight a couple that came up. So all of the resources from NCC that are there, which are amazing. They have different libraries of the different articles of the Constitution. I know Jason mentioned the iCivics games, but you also have iCivics DB Quest and DB Quest, which lets students explore primary source documents. So that is there. You also have some different resources from other institutions as well. So Agents of Influence, the development of political parties, really, and I will also say at different depths of knowledge. So definitely go and explore. Some are just starting to scratch the surface, and some are really deep on very specific topics. And finally, there are lessons across K-12. So if you're coming from the elementary classroom, go poke around and explore too. We are going to skip our small group discussion today because we have 3 minutes, and that would, by the time I press the button, release you and come back, time would be done. But but I am happy to stay on just for a couple of minutes. If you want to chat, if there's something you're thinking about, I'm more than happy to just be a sounding board here for a few minutes. And finally, as we close out today, take a couple of minutes and just go ahead and complete the exit ticket that you'll find on your landing page for today. One of the great pieces around that feedback is we continue to improve our sessions and make sure that we're incorporating what you're asking for and what you have, and we can follow up with questions if you have any. So go ahead and complete the exit ticket while I wrap up our last couple of slides for today. And this is the great part of having like the 3 or 4 minutes to close out. You can actually do the exit ticket right now. Like while I'm talking, I can't even tell. I won't even be able to tell that you're typing. It's perfectly fine. And I always like to close our session out with a reminder of our ambitious goals for educating for American democracy. As we think about the goals, thinking about 60 million students, 100,000 schools, and 1 million teachers, thinking about how are we making sure that all of our students, all of our teachers, all of our classrooms have access to high quality history and civics instruction, okay? Really making sure that it takes all of us working together to do that. So keeping that at the center of our thoughts and thinking about what steps you can take. Invite others. If you came to a session, invite others to come to a session, okay? Explore the resources and bring them back to your classroom. We always take that time at the very beginning to provide people the space of, well, how are you actually starting to think about the roadmap in your classroom? And finally, continue the dialogue. As we mentioned, we have multiple sessions. So we have 3 sessions left in our series, and the registration links are actually on the landing page for today. But definitely come and check out the conversations that we're going to be diving into in the future. And we're super excited. We'll again have different organizations and educators partnering to come together and just have a great conversation with you. And on that note, I probably have like 5 seconds to spare. I'm so glad that you all joined us this evening and took the time to stop, think about the principles and purposes of the Constitution, how we can actually start to approach that into the classroom. And I hope everyone has a fabulous evening. I'll be around for a few minutes. If you have any questions, I will stop the recording. But I'm so excited. Complete the exit ticket, and a huge thank you to Curry and to Jason for joining us this evening. Amazing conversation, amazing resources. Just lovely to have you both here today. And on that note, I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.